Welcome to the Myrna Method live stream. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haig.
Hold on.
Okay, are we ready? Okay, IT. Give us a couple seconds.
Okay, just a second. Hold on, Myrna. Hold on. Okay, it's not working. Hold on a second. Okay, let's see. There we go.
Testing.
Try it. Hold on. All right, try it again.
Okay, are we ready?
Hold
Maybe?
on. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, I think
Are we on?
should be good to go.
Okay. Is it on? Little IT difficulties.
Yeah. Should
Okay, perfect. Welcome to the Myrna Method live stream. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haig. My goal is to bring you great nutrition information, useful nutrition information. Most importantly, it's impactful in your life, can make a huge difference. What we're going to talk about in this video, it's all over the internet right now, and I actually had a patient yesterday talk to me about what's up with beef tallow, because right now it seems to be the hottest thing going as far as changing out some of these seed oils for beef tallow. And is it really everything it's made out to be? So what we're going to talk about in this video is beef tallow versus seed oil. And let's get down to the science on it and decide if it's right for you. So Sam, if you'll switch me over to the PowerPoint.
All right.
Okay, so when we look at beef tallow, first of all, let's identify the two. Beef tallow is saturated fat, and we'll talk about the differences between the saturated fats versus the unsaturated. But beef tallow is a saturated fat that has been rendered. And what makes this unique is that it's chemically more stable during cooking. So just like a saturated fat and an unsaturated fat, they're going to have the same benefits versus risk. So when we're looking at both fats, fats have good things and fats have not so good things. So let's talk about the good and the bad for the saturated fats. Health benefits, they have cholesterol fats, which, believe it or not, that can be a health benefit. It helps build hormones, vitamin D, increases the good cholesterol's HDL, helps with brain health. Everybody needs a little more brain, right? And it's also more chemically stable. So that means it's less prone to damage, such as trans fats. Now, here's the health risk. It actually increases oxidation in the artery wall. It increases the LDL bad cholesterols. And it's typically recommended that we have anywhere from 10 to 15% or less in our diet, which works out to be about 20, 25 grams for most people. So now we'll talk about the seed oils, because we're either going to be looking at a saturated fat or an unsaturated fat. So when we look at the unsaturated fats, these are chemically less stable during cooking. So that means they're going to cause more damage when you cook them. The health benefit is that they have an increase in omega-3 fats. And omega-3 fats are interesting fats. We're not going to really dive into the omega-3 versus the omega-6 fats in this video, but it is an important part of fats. The health benefits are the increase of the good fats, which is the omega-3s, which help decrease inflammation. They also have polyphenols, which improves vascular health. There's been some studies on olive oil having some polyphenols. It can really help in that area. So it's been like a heart-healthy fat. Some of the risks is it's more prone to damage with cooking, meaning it becomes a damaged fat, which increases inflammation. It means it's less chemically stable, and therefore it's more likely to be a trans fat during the hydrogenation process, which is what all processed foods go through, most of them. And that's why the big hit was for us to know how many trans fats are in these processed foods. So trans fats are going to be much higher in these seed oils. The seed oils are going to be coming from mostly some of your plants. So when we look at the types of fats, really, I'm going to just basically break it down to three big types: trans fats, saturated and unsaturated fats. So trans fats, which I didn't really put it up here, it should have been, let me just type it in here. So we have trans fats.
They're at the bottom.
Oh, they are? Okay. Maybe Sam's got it for me. So the trans fats.
They're right there in red underneath saturated.
Okay, there we go. There we go. I was looking for them at the top. Let me get rid of this.
They're broken saturated.
Okay, there we go. So we got our saturated fats, our unsaturated fats, and we've got our trans fats. Those are the big fats. And the saturated fats, there's some good and fat, there's some good and bad, same with the unsaturated. So when we look at the damaged fats, the key point I want you to get here is that both saturated and unsaturated fats can become damaging fats. And it's these damaging fats that cause all this inflammation, tissue damage, cardiovascular disease, and even diabetes, which we're going to cover in this video. So it's really the types of fats that become damaged. And the takeaway is that some of the saturated fats are less likely to be damaged during cooking than the seed oils that have more damaging properties. They actually don't take as high a temperatures. They're not as stable. And they're really very trans when they're processed. So a lot of our processed foods, a lot of things that have chips and things that we see at the store that have a lot of fat, most likely are going to have some trans fats in them because they were processed. But really we have to get down to what is the debate on fats. And the debate on the fats, what do we hear in the first place, is that it's a real issue with obesity. And we all know the biggest problem we face right now is obesity, and it's on the rise. So if you look at the chart here and you look at 2020, obesity is almost at 50%, 42%. And that's at 2020. And it's growing every year. So I'm sure by 2030, we're probably going to hit that 50% mark. And I think with obesity, a lot of times we want to, either people are blaming it on too many carbs or too many fats. In fact, carbs and fat are the biggest controversy in diet. How much do I need? One, I'm going to eliminate, the other, fat-free diet, carb-free diet. So let's really get down to understanding what it means from a diet perspective. Because it's not necessarily do I want to eat saturated versus unsaturated, do I want to eliminate one more than the other. It has to do with a balance. Bottom line, we're all getting fatter. And in this chart, it shows that the seed oils in red, they have gone up the most, the vegetable oils. And then we have some of the animal fats, seems like they haven't increased as much, but the dotted line is the obesity line, and that line has definitely gone up, and the seed oils have gone up. So basically what this tells me is that obesity's gone up, but what has also gone up in the same range and the same amount has been the seed oils, where our oils that have to do with animal fats, they've pretty much stayed the same. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, can we say that this is a cause and effect? Not really, but it's definitely associated, and it's worth taking note. So let's go back to the controversy, because right now, RFK, which is why it's all over the internet, he's really having a lot of these fast food chains switch out the oils that they're frying the foods in and putting in the tallow fat, taking out the seed oils. Now, it's still very controversial because if we go to American Heart Association, they're talking about there's no reason to avoid the seed oils. In fact, a lot of studies will show when I go to the internet that the plant-based oils are so much better for you and that these saturated oils are a problem. Now, saturated fats. The saturated fats are usually harder fats, so they're typically not oils until you heat them up. But the saturated fats, are much better for cooking because they're more stable and they don't turn to a damaged fat. But the saturated fats in excess can be a problem. So I think what we're getting at here is we're having to look at these fats and decide what category we're talking about, right? So if we're talking about cooking, I have to say definitely RFK's got the right idea. Because if we're going to use a tallow fat, if we go back to the other original video, it's going to be rendered, which means it has a different processing than most saturated fats, and it's going to be more stable during cooking. So if they're using a lot of the seed oils to fry the French fries in, it's going to be less stable, which means the seed oils are going to have more propensity to be a damaging fat. Whereas the tallow, even more so than the saturated fat, is going to be a lot better because it's not going to reach, it's got a much higher smoke point. It's got a much higher damaging point when cooking. So that means much better for us. But we can't forget, okay, that too much saturated fat can have other implications. But if we're just looking at from what are we trying to do in cooking our French fries, then I'm going to have to say much better to have it in tallow than it would be in a seed oil. But that's not exactly the total picture. And I would be just cutting you off there and really not giving you service, right? Because then you would figure tallow is good, I'm good, life's great. I knew the saturated fat was better for me. So you have to give the whole story, especially with nutrition. A lot of times people will just cherry pick one thing, but they don't open up the whole lens and tell you the whole deal. So that's what I want to do here. So really, when we're looking at the big picture regarding fat, there's three main things you got to consider. The amount, the damage, fat's actually getting damaged, because whether it's saturated or unsaturated, whether you cook it or not, there is a damaging aspect to it. And then number three, there's actually a balance of the omega-3 versus the omega-6. Now, I think number three is a whole nother YouTube, because that can take me another 30 minutes, but this is actually worth talking about. And I think, Sam, we need to come back to that. Make a note of that for me. But what we're going to really cover in this video, and this will be plenty, big part of it is going to be the amount and how some of these saturated and unsaturated fats become damaging fats. Because once again, there are some healthy attributes to both of them, so we can't say that they're all bad, but it's understanding the context that decides whether it's good or bad. So let's talk about the amount. We definitely have the right amount of fat we need. Now, a lot of people do not like you to tell them this, okay? But it's just nutrition fact. Now, I'm not saying that if you do higher fats, for some people genetically, they might be able to handle maybe 40%. But as a rule of thumb, when we're looking at the mass population, the percentage is going to be anywhere from 25 to 35% of your daily calories. Now, here's the big kicker here. Daily calories for your ideal body weight. It's not based on the fat percentage on what you weigh now, because I just showed you a chart. Most Americans, like almost 50% of us, are too fat. So that means it's going to be skewed and you're going to keep getting too fat. So we need to get the right amount of fat based on your ideal body weight. Now, a lot of people don't know their ideal body weight. So let's talk about your ideal body weight, and then let's come to the formula to figure out exactly the amount of fat we need. And then I'm going to tell you when you don't get that right amount. So how do you get to your ideal body weight? Real easy formula. If you're a female, you will take every inch over 5 feet and you're going to add 5 pounds. And you're going to start with 100 pounds. So if you're 5'4", then that means 4 inches over 5 feet times 5. It'll be 20 pounds plus 100. So your ideal body weight will be 120 pounds. We can easily add 10 to 15 pounds on that and still be within that normal BMI range. For men, similar formula, except we're going to use 6 pounds for every inch over 5 feet, and we're going to add it to 106. So if you're 5'10", then it's going to be 10 inches times 6 is 60, plus 106, you're going to be coming up with 166. And I have a little formula sheet in case you want to stop the video and figure out yours. You just put in your height here and you subtract out the inches, and then you multiply by 5 for a female, 6 by a male, add it to 106, add it to 100 pounds, and you're going to come up with your ideal body weight. You can also add 10 pounds to it and definitely be within the norm. So when we're really looking at our ideal body weight, and let's say this person's 120 pounds, we'll just use that example, you will divide that by 3. And that's going to give you the approximate amount of fat grams at 25%, which will be at the lower range. And you can easily add 20 grams to that, whatever amount you get, and that'll be within the range of 25 to 35. So it gives you a range. So 40 to 60 grams of fat, okay, is going to be right for a person whose ideal body weight is 120. Not what they weigh now. They might weigh 200 pounds now. So we don't want to figure out the fat percentage on your current weight, because that fat percentage may be too high, and it may be the reason why you're not dropping weight, right? So I think it's super important to know what your range is, because this is a main culprit for many diseases, the amount. So two things go haywire. You get the wrong amount, and it's a damaging fat. That's what's really behind a lot of the obesity epidemic in regards to diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Before we really get into the disease part of this, let's just give you some food values, because a lot of times when we say 40 to 60 grams of fat for the day, what does that mean in food? Well, I always say get to know your food, right? Get to know your friends, know what's in your bank account, know what your nutrition numbers are, and get to know your food. So for 1 tablespoon of oil, it's approximately 15 grams of fat. 1 tablespoon of butter or nut butter or any kind of fatty spreads kind of gives you a pretty ballpark amount. So peanut butter, any kind of peanut butter is going to be 8 to 9 grams. Butter, just plain old butter, 12 grams. So you can see that if your fat grams are at 40, you can see how it can add up. 1/4 cup of nuts, just 1/4 cup of nuts. Get out 1/4 and see how small 1/4 cup of nuts is. A lot of people eat a cup of nuts a day, and they'll be easily at 45 grams without a shake of a stick. So that's a really good indicator to see where your fat is. And also, I didn't put it on here, but an avocado is about 20 grams of fat. So you want to really get to know your fats and get to know.
Go to slide 16. I'm sorry.
Oh, slide 6.
That slide was not correct.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Thanks, Sam. Okay, we got a much better slide, thanks to Sam. And this one gives us the same, but better pictures. Look, that's the one she did. The other one was the one I did. So you can tell who's the talented one here. Okay. So this gives us a really good idea of what our fats are. Super important, because it helps you understand what it means when someone says, hey, 40 to 60 grams, or whenever you figure out your ideal fat grams. So let's talk about lipid toxicity when we're talking about excess fatty acids. And when we're talking about excess fatty acids, it's just like what it sounds. Excess fats that are circulating in the blood. And how do they get there? 2 ways. Fats either are going to come from too much dietary fat. That's somebody maybe eating 40% dietary fat. They're above the 35%, and they're releasing a lot of fatty acids into circulation. Or maybe you just have too many fat cells. Maybe you're just too overweight. You have too much body fat. That also releases fatty acids. And the key point is excess fatty acids accumulate in muscle cells. And a lot of people don't know this. And this is associated with type 2 diabetes. So we have another slide, I think, that tells the picture really well. And I always kind of go over this because I feel it's super important. When you eat sugar, your body releases insulin. Insulin attaches to a receptor site on a muscle cell, also on neuronal cells in the brain. The 2 biggest demanders for sugar is your muscles and your brain. So insulin attaches to this receptor site, who talks to a messenger and brings up a transporter to the surface of the cell. This is how sugar gets inside of the cell. It goes through the transporter, and that's how it works. But here's what happens with type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. Both. Insulin resistance happens a couple decades or even 1 decade before type 2 diabetes. This doesn't get a message to allow the transporters to the surface because it is all gunked up with too many fatty acids that turn to a type of fat called a ceramide. So as these fatty acids get into circulation in excess because you have too much body fat, too much dietary fat, it begins to accumulate in muscle cells. And when it becomes excess, these healthy fats coming from saturated or unsaturated, because there's health properties in both, the key here is the amount is the issue. It then causes it to turn to a ceramide fat. These ceramide fats clog up the insulin receptor site. Insulin can't get the message to bring the transporter to the brain. But the other thing that can happen is that these ceramide fats circulate. As you generate more ceramide fats, they begin to circulate in the bloodstream, and they can also cause a lot of problems. And we're going to talk about those next. But let's look at some studies in relationship to this. Lipid toxicity, which just means a lot of excess circulating fatty acids, get taken up into the muscle tissue. And this increases the risk for insulin resistance. Let it go too long, and you got type 2 diabetes. And in this study, it definitely talks about mounting evidence indicates that elevated intramyocellular triglycerols, which are just those fats that get into that muscle cells, are associated with a diminished insulin sensitivity in the skeletal muscle, which we just showed you. This is lipid accumulation, which means fat, and is most likely due to an enhanced fatty acid uptake into the muscle. Okay, and if you go to the second highlighted area in the study, it talks about for most of the human population, this is avoidable. It sure is. We just have to know how to eat. Given that the cause of intramyocellular lipid, meaning fat, deposits are predominantly a lifestyle problem. Chronic overconsumption of calories, obviously, you eat too much, even if it's a low-fat diet, you're going to get excess fat storage, right? Because those fat cells will store anything in excess. So either excess calories, even on a fat-free diet, or just an excess fatty diet, even if you're not eating a lot of calories, which gives a lot of reason why somebody could literally have type 2 diabetes, have a lot of ceramide release, have a lot of issues because of these fats, and be at their ideal body weight. So I think this study talks about how this is a problem. And if you look at the last line, that even having a lack of exercise can have a profound effect on the muscle lipid turnover. Well, because when you're exercising, you are burning more fats. And I had a lot of videos where I talked about that, where when you are moving is when you actually burn the most body fat, is when you're exercising. So it makes sense. I have less fat. It means that I have less fat circulating, less fat in my body, and it's going to be better for me. So here's another study that talks about lipid fat accumulation in non-adipose tissue, adipose meaning fat. So that's saying we're getting a lot of lipids, a lot of fat accumulated in tissue that's not meant for it. Fat tissue is meant for storing fat, and muscle tissue is not. And in this study, it's very clear, states right at the top, in skeletal muscle and liver, because liver will do the same, you can get a fatty liver, lipid accumulation, excess fat, has been associated with the development of insulin resistance and an early hallmark of developing type 2 diabetes. And at the bottom part of the study, it talks about accumulation of fat in the heart has been associated with cardiac dysfunction, which means heart failure, heart problems, and also diabetic problems. And this is all due to excess fatty acids that accumulate in tissue it's not supposed to, like muscle tissue. So this to me is huge, because even if you're doing tallow fat and you think you're doing the right thing because it's a less damaging fat, amount of fat is an issue. Okay, so I want to look at the big elephant in the room and not just say, okay, tallow fat is better than a seed oil for frying. You got to still look at the big picture. And in this study, it talks about a high fat consumption causes an overproduction of circulating fatty acids. Well, yeah, we just went over that. And this also promotes oxidative stress, which I'm going to get to next. So we talk about how these excess fatty acids promote diabetes, And in this study, it talks about, in the highlighted area, several studies have indicated that a high fat consumption causes overproduction of circulating fatty acids and systemic inflammation. Immune cells, fatty acids, and circulating cytokines, which are just immune cells, reach the hypothalamus. That's actually the appetite center in the brain. And in this study, it talks about how that can cause some inflammation, and they're referring to this in regards to cognitive decline. So yeah, it's really important because in this study, it's showing that these high-fat consumptions promote oxidative stress in these neurodegenerative areas in the brain, and causes neurodegeneration in the brain, and this can be a problem for dementia and cognitive decline. So I thought I'd throw that out there because I know a lot of people, and I talked about this before as well, that once you get Alzheimer's, you have a sugar problem. And I talk about this in a video on my live stream, type 3 diabetes. And I talk about how it's happening in the muscle, it's going to happen in the brain. Type 3 diabetes is Alzheimer's. And what causes this is a lot of these excess fatty acids. But actually, once you get the disease, now you have a real sugar problem, just like with diabetes. You get the problem where these receptor sites are all clogged up, and sugar cannot get inside the muscle cell. So sugar builds outside the muscle cell, and now you have a sugar problem. This not only happens in the muscle tissue, it happens in the brain, because the brain also has insulin receptor sites, and sugar's trying to get in there in certain neuronal cells. And this is a problem because when you have a sugar problem, all this excess sugar circulates in all parts of the body and causes all kinds of damage. Neuropathy, you start reversing the fat from the diet, and you're going to start reversing the sugar from the diet. And that's a really aha moment for a lot of people because they go on a diet and they reduce the carbs. They go see their doctor. Their A1C's dropping. Everybody's happy for you. But all you did is reverse the sugar out of the blood. The root cause of the disease is excess fatty acids. So eventually you'll get better for a while, but then it's going to play catch up with you. So that's, I think, a main point that I really wanted to bring home. I do it in a lot of my podcasts because I talk about balancing protein, fiber, carbs, and fat. If you're really going to learn to eat, then you really need to learn to eat. Know that these macronutrients all have a purpose and all work together in synergy. So when we look at damaged fats, let's look about oxidizing fats and what all this means. Saturated fats have less damage at higher temperatures, which right away that gives a really good point why we would want to use the beef tallow versus the seed oil. So this means it's going to hold on to its chemical structure. Rendered fats are going to be the most stable, even better than most saturated fats. So rendering is a process they go through with the fat, and it makes it more stable. So that means we're going to have a fat that's less damaging. So what does a damaging fat do in other areas of the body? Well, we'll talk about trans fats to start with. Trans fats are fats that have been chemically altered. They've been damaged. So a lot of your processed foods already have these little trans fats circulating, and they can actually get up into that artery wall. This here is a picture of an artery, and this is the artery wall, and these trans fats do a couple things. They increase the bad cholesterol, and they also increase inflammation. And the way they increase inflammation is that they are activated by what are called reactive oxygen species. And these are just little compounds that are made in the body because you're breathing, because you have a metabolism. And these reactive oxygen species, we'll just call them ROS for short, they can cause oxidation. And their most favorite thing to oxidize are LDL fats. And when they oxidize these LDL fats, this creates inflammation and causes the plaque to form. Also, this happens with trans fats. That can also increase inflammation and cause the plaque to form. You look at ceramides. We can't forget our little ceramides. Ceramides that were released from the blood, that were released because the muscles really had a lot of excess fatty acids. They were released into the plasma, into the blood, and they find their way into the arteries. And so these three are what we call atherogenic fats, and they contribute to atherosclerosis, which is a type of heart disease where plaque forms in the artery wall, and a couple things can happen. Number one, you can narrow the wall. So when a lot of people get stents, what they're really trying to do is open up that area. Not a good thing if you got a lot of blood trying to rush through a small opening. But the other thing that can be troubling is that we can also have a situation where we could have the artery wall actually getting damaged. And when that artery wall gets damaged and you got a lot of plaque, then we got another thing to worry about, because some of this plaque can get dislodged and go up here and clog that opening, especially if we're not talking about a big opening. It's certainly not going to take a lot of plaque to cause this type of obstruction, and that's a heart attack. It leads to a stroke. So this is a big problem. And what's contributing to the problem is a lot of these damaging fats getting up into this artery. So once again, we don't want fats to be damaged. Even if we're not eating a lot of fats, we want to reduce the damage. Seed oils have a propensity to become damaged much easier than some of the saturated fats. But then that's not the solving of the problem either, because an increase of saturated fats increases reactive oxygen species. So if you have a lot of saturated fats, you're going to get these activators. And why is that not good? Because these activators begin to oxidize a lot of stuff, not just bad fats, but they can go into the brain. They can do a lot of oxidative damage. So excess saturated fats, which is why CDC, American Heart Association, they're really pushing the seed oils, because they're like, oh, we don't want a lot of saturated fats. But actually what we want to do is we want to look at the amount of fats. And when we look at what the typical American diet is, quite honestly, most people are up around the 40, 50, even 60% of their diet fat, because they're so afraid that if they eat the carbs, they're going to contribute to more insulin resistance, which could make sense, right? Because you can't seem to get the sugar in there. But the deal is, and the way you solve this, is to eat a balanced diet. Understand your protein, carbs, fats, know how much you need, and bring that into the diet. So let's look at some of these studies regarding this, because I think it's important to not only show the science, but to be able to back it up. So trans fat is a double trouble for heart health. And in this study, it talks about trans fats raise bad cholesterols and they lower the good cholesterols. Experts say that trans fat is the worst type of fat to eat. That's because it raises bad cholesterol, so it not only brings more LDLs into that artery wall, it lowers the good cholesterols, which helps clean up the bad cholesterols. A diet high in trans fats raises the risk of heart attack and stroke, and sometimes this type of fat is also called a trans fatty acid. So if we go back to our diagram, I think this really is explaining it right here, is that a lot of these fats get oxidized, and this is part of the whole problem with cardiovascular disease. In this study, it talks about trans fats' damaging effect and how it promotes storage in the liver. So trans fats actually can increase fatty liver. And we see fatty liver a lot with people who eat processed foods. Now, also high fructose corn syrup can also contribute to fatty liver, but so can trans fats. And all our processed foods, most of them, through the processing, through the hydrogenation to get that seed oil to be a chip or infuse it in whatever high fat food we're eating that's processed, you're going to have that trans fatty acid most likely. And this is considered a damaging fat. And people who eat a lot of processed foods, we can see fatty liver, right? So this is all this study talks about. Human studies have established a positive association between the intake of industrial trans fatty acids and the development of cardiovascular disease. What do they mean by industrial? Well, there's a little bit of trans fats and some saturated fats, but there's a whole lot when it's industrialized, because the actual process of hydrogenation, which is taking a fat and putting it into a chip or whatever food you're eating out of a box, that actually is more damaging. And we already showed how that contributes to cardiovascular disease. And in this study also talks about some of the damaging effects also with some of the saturated fats. So, here they talk about the saturated fats seem to be damaging as far as creating more reactive oxygen species. But, I don't think the plant oils are that much better as well. I mean, my attitude is you got to know your fats and be able to control it on both ends. So it's the amount and not eating a lot of damaging fats, not eating a lot of processed foods, not a lot of trans fats. And quite honestly, I'm just not in favor of eating a lot of saturated fats for the same reason. So we already went through that study. So let's go back to the whole conflict or controversy, beef tallow or seed oil, because that's what's all over the internet. Which one do we do? Well, RFK has a really good point. If we're going to be doing the French fries, because I don't think we're going to be telling people to eliminate French fries anytime soon. So if that's what we're up against, then most definitely the rendered saturated fat is going to be better because it has a higher tolerance, a higher chemical tolerance, and not become a damaged fat. So there you go, RFK, good job, good point. Although I think we need to talk a little bit more about balancing our diet. So I also want to let everybody know I just published my first book on all this stuff, teaching you guys how to balance your macronutrients and why your diets fail and the science that really works, which is what I talk about in all my streams. How we learn to eat, how we eat, managing these macronutrients makes all the difference in the world. So it's on Amazon. Don't forget to go check it out. And also, you can get on my membership. Go to Myrna Method. You can become a member. On Tuesdays, I do a live stream where we just dive into how to eat to maintain your leanest and healthiest weight. So we really dive into the macros, how to balance them, not only at meals, but for the day, come up with recipes, meals. Plus, I think we also have a whole lot of fun. And anyway, I'm having a whole lot of fun. I hope you guys do too. So I want to make sure, I didn't quite get it under 30 minutes. I'm trying, folks. I'm trying. Okay. So I wanted to leave it open for chat. And Sammy?
No chats today.
No chats? Okay.
No chats, but just don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah, she's got that right. Yeah. Don't forget to subscribe, do all that magic stuff that really helps the channel. You can tell I really get that part really well.
We're almost at 700.
Yeah, 700 followers.
So
Woo!
we're very close.
Yes, thank you. And I love my followers. Anyways, Sam, we don't have any more chats?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Until next week, see you guys. Thank you.